Arlene, we ready?
I'm ready.
All systems go, Arlene?
All
John, all
systems
systems
go.
go?
All systems are go.
This is Jim Eskin, and on behalf of Eskin Fundraising Training, it's my privilege to welcome you to our third nonprofit empowerment webinar. And I'm going to ask a lot of questions. And you all have the ability, I'll tell you what, John, so they are familiar with the chat space, because I'm going to start right away with questions. I'd like to bring in our producer, John Largent, who's CEO of Game Day Media. And I shudder to think how we would do this without him. We just wouldn't. John, thank you for making this series possible. And can you share some housekeeping notes, particularly how people can type comments and questions in?
Thank you, my pleasure. Throughout the webinar, you can ask questions down. Once you touch your screen, there should be a pop-up that shows up at the bottom of your screen that says chat or Q&A. And you can ask your questions in the Q&A section, and you can make comments in the chat section. We won't have any interactive conversation except between Jim and Arlene during the conversation, but at the end, they will answer any questions that you put in those boxes. Back to you, Jim.
Okay, I'm going to start with a question for our audience. I'm going to warn you, it might be a tough question, and I want you to type in either yes, no, or maybe. And that is, does your nonprofit want to secure government and foundation relief grants? Type in yes, no, or maybe. What are you seeing, John?
All yeses and a few maybes.
Okay. Okay. Well, it is a pleasure to meet her a little later in the show, but I am so thrilled to have the person I know that knows the most about government and private foundation grants. That's Dr. Arlene Siller, and she's raised over $100 million in her career. And in 2019, launched Ascend Nonprofit and Business Solutions. She's going to have a fuller introduction as we move on. But Arlene, how are you today? How's your family? Healthy?
My family's doing great, Jim. Thank you for asking.
Okay, we'll get to you in a few minutes. This is a time of crisis, and it's a time of heroes. And you know, some of the heroes are obvious. We call them the first responders. They're the people in our healthcare system. They're the people who deliver the mail, who protect us, the police and the fire. But there's a whole new cadre of heroes. And those are the people who are making the necessities of life available to us. And I want to recognize and thank them. They're keeping us fed. They're keeping us with our prescription meds, and they're delivering things. I mean, every time I look out the window, I see a delivery truck, and I think they are heroes because they're making us, making it possible for us to deal with a very difficult situation. But to our nonprofit partners, you all are heroes. You all are heroes before this started, and now I think you're bigger heroes than ever. And we realize, just like everyone else, and probably more so, the nonprofit sector faces a dilemma that the needs that you all have to serve are rising at the same time that your resources are being challenged. And that's why I'm so delighted to have Dr. Siller help us understand more about how to secure government and private grants. I'm biased. There are over 1.5 million nonprofits in the United States. There are more than 100,000 in the state of Texas, and there are more than 6,000 in the San Antonio area. And quite frankly, the work that you do is special under any occasions, And again, we've never need you more than ever. Now I'm going to ask you a couple of things. This is a little exercise that we introduced last week. And I'd like you, this by the way, is a slogan and a graphic that we have developed. And we are sending it out to all of you, everyone who's on my strategist newsletter list, which is now about 2,600, is going to be sent this slogan and in a JPEG form. And we would like you to consider using it and incorporating it in your e-communications. But I'm going to ask you to do something right now. Can you type in the screen, we're nonprofit strong. We're nonprofit. Please type in the screen, we're nonprofit strong. Arlene, what are we?
Nonprofit strong. Sorry, I had myself muted.
What are we?
Nonprofit strong.
We are, and we're going to be. This is the third of the webinar series, and it's a delight to have Dr. Siller. And we mentioned Marv Leroy in the waiting room. He's coming to join us on Wednesday, April 22nd. We have an argument. We don't know if our relationship is decided as a colleague or as a friend, and I'm going to even take it. We're almost like brothers. And I'm so delighted that Marv's going to join us on April 22nd. By the way, Arlene and I have a lot of information, but we're not pretending to know it all. And from the very beginning of our workshop series to the webinar, we have embraced the concept of learning community, that all of you have wisdom and insights and experience that we want to share. And we like to say, when we bring our learning community together, in the words of my longtime friend, Chuck Posner, the answers are always in the room. I really believe that within our learning community, we can answer any question that comes up. I want you to get a little feedback, as we're going to be planning a lot more of these webinars. And I'd like you to either type in, if you would like it to address discovery, type in A, cultivation, type in B, solicitation, type in C, stewardship, type in D. I will give you, I think, a whole 10 seconds to do that. John, are we getting any responses?
Yes, we are. And they're all over. Every one of them has been a lot of solicitation and discovery. There are a few cultivation, but
Okay.
solicitation and discovery are the primary elements.
Okay. We are going to reflect that. Again, we plan to continue this series virtually every Wednesday from here on. That's a long time. Every Wednesday, 4 to 5 p.m. Central Time. 30 seconds about myself. I spent a very fulfilling 25 years in higher education advancement. And in May of 2018, my wife Angie and I decided to pursue a dream that meshed two passions. One is a passion for teaching the art and science of fundraising, and for helping board members and volunteers and staff overcome the fear of asking for a gift. And the other is to branch out after working for 3 wonderful higher education institutions, is to do something on my own. And so starting in June of 2018, we started a lot of workshops that have been held in conjunction with Microsoft, with Texas Capital Bank, with the insurance firm Cato & Cato, and finally Mass Mutual of South Texas. I'm just going to take a few minutes to review what I call the basics of the art and science of fundraising. I'm going to put kind of a spin on the COVID-19 on it. I like to say we can separate the gift cycle into 4 distinct phases. And that's, the first one is discovery. Who are we going to ask for money and why? Number 2 is cultivation. How do we build a personal and emotional link between our donor prospect and the mission of our organization? The third is the obvious one, the who, what, when, where, how much we ask for. And finally, we close the loop by acknowledging and thanking our donors so we can come back the next year and ask them to give and consider to give even more. I'm going to emphasize in COVID-19, this is not the time to take your foot off the gas pedal. I would say there's absolutely no reason that you shouldn't proceed with discovery. There's no reason you shouldn't proceed with cultivation. We're going to talk a little about solicitation, but there's no reason you shouldn't continue to thank your donors. We want to mention, everyone makes a big point, they're scared of asking for a gift, but as Dr. Siller is well aware, really 90% of the work happens before the solicitation is made. And if you do a good job of building awareness and cultivating interest, actually asking and requesting the gift is easy. If you don't do a good job, I don't care how good the solicitor is. I want to say a few things. Last year, American philanthropy totaled a record $428 billion. And I know a lot of you are kind of scared that we might have a dip, and there's good reason to think that. But I've been looking at some data, two reports I was very encouraged by. The BBB Wise Giving Alliance did a survey of donors, and in this survey, 31% said they plan to give more in 2020. Americans react to crisis, and more than half of the people surveyed, about 53%, said they're at least going to give the same. This same survey was reinforced by the good friends at Fidelity Charitable. And in that survey, 3 out of 4 donors said that they plan to give the same or more than they did in 2019. Another thing, the most dynamic component of philanthropy is now the donor advised funds. Last year, they hit a record $7.3 billion, and that was $7.3 billion just the Fidelity Charitable. And Fidelity Charitable is reporting a record upturn in donor advised fund grants. And their volume this March increased 36% from last year. And last year was a record year. And finally, to me, what's very encouraging, big gifts. Jack Dorsey, who's one of the co-founders of Twitter, has pledged $1 billion, folks. $1 billion. Okay, that's about more than a quarter of his overall wealth. So we're seeing some encouraging signs. One of the things I always want to point out, you know, that most of the American philanthropy, it comes from the individuals. We've been tracking this data for about 60 years, and the numbers have changed, but the percentage has really stayed somewhere between 65 to 70% for individuals. So as you are asking about, you know, or thinking about who should ask for money, I love foundation money, I love corporation money, but the bulk of the money comes from individuals. Can you fundraise from home? You bet you can. We're going to talk a little more about that. In some ways, fundraisers have an edge over other type of people. I want to take a few minutes before we bring Arlene in and talk about what I call the 4 R's, okay, of COVID, of nonprofits responding to COVID-19. The first is you got to move fast. And by the way, for your smaller nonprofits out there, we see a lot of them in our workshops, you actually have an advantage. Small makes you nimble and you can respond quickly. And so I can't emphasize enough that you should be communicating with your donors and prospects and your stakeholders. Now, I know what you're thinking. You know, you don't know a lot, and there's more you don't know than what you do know. But what you know more than anyone else in the world is how COVID-19 is impacting your nonprofit, and you should be sharing that, again, with your donors and your other stakeholders. Relevant. This is a great time to scrutinize your mission. How are you positioned to provide much needed relief and aid? And perhaps this is a good time to tweak your mission. So boards and senior staff should be having a conversation right now about how they are positioned to respond to COVID-19. Relationship, as we know, is the strongest word in the fundraisers toolkit. And this is a time that you really want to look at your closest inner circle of donors, okay? Those who have supported you in the past have demonstrated that they share, the power of your mission. And we suggest going to your leading donors, and different nonprofits it's going to be defined, but whoever the top 10 or whatever donors, in some organizations it might start at 10,000, in some organizations it might be 100,000 and 1 million. And I would suggest approaching them with something like this. We could not imagine responding to a moment like this without asking for your input and your continued philanthropic leadership, and ask for a specific amount. Again, treat donors like family. What are we doing with family? We're checking in on them. We're finding out how they're doing. We're letting them know how we're doing. That's the type of communication that the nonprofit sector is positioned to have with its donors and friends. Check in, treat them like family. And, you can't hug them up close, but you sure are getting good at hugging virtually. And I'm telling you that this is a great time. If you have senior donors that aren't familiar with Zoom, help them get on Zoom. It's not only going to be good for their relationship with you, but if they're not on Zoom, they're missing out on the best way to keep in touch with loved ones. Finally, we know all how resilient the nonprofit sector. You are not new to challenges. You have to be creative, entrepreneurial. You have to stretch nickels and dimes, and you have to be creative. And I might mention, a lot of the relief checks are going out. What is it, about $1,200 per person, $2,400 per couple. And that is helping a lot of folks who desperately need help with the necessities. But then again, there's some of us who are fortunate enough, and to tell the truth, we're fine without those checks. And I might just suggest to our nonprofit friends to find some of your donors who are willing to share those checks from the government and highlight their stories. And be sure to pick people who aren't known for their wealth, but are people just more like everyday people. But the nonprofit sector knows how to be creative. Okay, Arlene, I wanted to bring you in at 20 minutes. I did pretty good at it. I think we're at 18 minutes down. And it is a pleasure, Arlene and Scylla and I, we met just in time, didn't we? A little in advance of COVID-19. And I've been looking for a long time that who's the best person I can get to talk about grants. And I met her, and she doesn't live far away. We go to the same Starbucks a lot. And it is a pleasure to introduce Dr. Arlene Siller. Again, during her prolific grant writing career, she raised over $100 million. And then like me, she had a dream of doing something on her own. So in 2019, she launched Ascend, and it's doing a beautiful job of empowering nonprofits to be more successful in securing government and foundation monies. First of all, Arlene, thank you so much for being our subject matter expert today.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, and we'll transition to Arlene's slides in a second. But I'm going to start. This is the way this is going to work. We're right on schedule. I'm going to ask Arlene several questions, and she's going to, some questions she might take a couple of minutes to respond, some less, some longer. And I think there'll be about 6 questions, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. Okay. Arlene, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Arlene, let's start with the first question. And I'm going to ask you a question. Tell us about your background. So it's much more colorful than mine.
Yeah, so my background is actually in biomedical sciences. My PhD.
Oh, I meant the physical background, all the colors.
Oh, my physical background. Okay, so I am in grief stage of missing Fiesta. So I wore my Fiesta earrings, and my house is just colorful and usually has kind of a Fiesta theme to it anyway. So Viva Fiesta, everyone.
Okay, let me start with the first serious question, okay?
Okay.
Arlene,
Are we sharing my slides?
Government? Yes, please.
Got it. All right.
Via Fiesta. Okay, Arlene, for the first question, do you see government and foundation grant monies increasing or decreasing during the COVID-19 environment and after?
Yeah. So first of all, Jim, I just wanted to thank you for having me on. But I also just want to thank and reiterate what Jim said in regard to the nonprofits that are on. Really, everything that you are doing for our community is so needed. We're standing behind you. You do have a bunch of cheerleaders out here that are rooting for you, and hopefully the information that we provide you today will be helpful to you as well. In terms of the question, is funding increasing or decreasing? It is absolutely increasing. There are billions of dollars right now being thrown into relief funds. So this is great for us.
Everybody say yay!
Yay! And you're going to see it kind of come in 3 waves. So the first wave will come through community foundations. I saw like a series of questions on the side about, whether we think funding is going to go down over this next year. For right now, it's not. So for those of you who don't know, community foundations practice something called asset averaging, where they are required to give away about 5% of their assets. And that's taken into account over a 3 to 5 year period. So it accounts for fluctuations of highs and lows. So from that standpoint, the giving will continue kind of in terms of where we have been over the last 3 to 5 years. But one of the things that we're seeing, and Jim had mentioned, is that corporations are giving. And one of the first places that they're going to give is to community foundations. We're seeing a 77% increase in corporate givings to community foundations.
Did you repeat that, Arlene?
77%. Okay. And why is that?
Number.
It goes right back to the community. So they're not giving at the national level, they're giving in the communities that they serve. An example that we have seen of that here in San Antonio would be the San Antonio Area Foundation with the United Way. We had corporations like USAA and HEB throwing money into that. So that's that first wave, is community foundations. So wherever you are, and if you're in need of some relief funds, that's the first place you want to go to. The second place is consortiums that come about from disaster, and what that involves is usually philanthropists, really just wealthy individuals. You'll see foundations as well. You'll see corporations and individuals that will give to something. We had examples of that during Hurricane Harvey here in San Antonio. With the Texas Relief Fund, One Star Foundation, the Dell Foundation, and there was about 40 other government and all other types of entities that were throwing money into that. And what I'm seeing right now, there's been a couple with Verizon and Lisk. That's Verizon Wireless. And then Google is also doing a journalism relief fund. So you'll start to see those types come together. And really they're centered around specific sectors and things that are of interest to them, the people they serve, and things like that. And the third wave will come from government. And of course, just like everything else in government, that's going to take a couple of weeks to months for that to roll out. But we are starting to see some of the grants that are coming out in response to COVID. And those are around the National Endowment for the Arts, Department of Education. Obviously, all of our students are learning remotely. Telecommunications, we're working remotely. Our kids are learning remotely. Telemedicine is another huge one, and there are some that are starting to trickle out for humanities, but you know, just keep looking out for those. I have to stress, though, in terms of government funding, you must be ready to apply for the grants. They will come out. They're going to be approximately a month. So it'll be a quick turnaround. It is not the time to get ready to apply for government funding. You need a SAMS registration. You need a CAGE code. You need a DUNS number. All this process takes about 2 months. And so you want to start getting ready for those so that when those grants do hit the streets, you're ready to go. Another thing in regard to the government grants, if I can just, you know, bring that up really, really quickly, is if you had any change in the name of your organization, if your address has changed, you need to make all those updates on grants.gov. And especially now, if you have laid off employees or furloughed people who may be receiving that email from grants.gov, you want to make sure that you have access to that and that your password has been updated, because even that little process of your password being updated is about a 3 or 4 day process. So you definitely don't want to get to the point of submitting a grant and the password's not valid.
Great, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Arlene, should a nonprofit apply for regular funding and COVID-19 emergency funding simultaneously?
Absolutely. I cannot stress this enough. Absolutely, absolutely.
Can we fist bump on that? I like that. Okay. Okay, thank you.
So chances are pretty good that your organization has been affected by COVID in one way, shape, or form, even if you're not on the front lines. I really want to stress to you, do not assume that you are not eligible because maybe you're in the arts or, you know, you're serving animals or something like that. Do not assume that you are not eligible. And don't assume that the funder will think you're greedy because you normally go for regular funding and now you're asking them for relief funding. Really, it is an opportunity for you to seek the funds that you need right now in terms of this transition. And another thing that you want to look for is special interest. We're seeing this a lot right now around arts and culture, and other sectors may pick this up. An example of that would be the Luminaria Artist Grant that was just available here in San Antonio that serves artists within the community. I think the Witty has one too, and there was an announcement, I think a day or two ago, out in Los Angeles where J. Paul Getty was creating a $10 million relief fund that was specific for museums and for the visual arts. So whatever your sector is, you want to kind of go and look for those special interest grants as well, where everybody is not going to be eligible for them, but you will. Next question.
Okay, Arlene, great information too. I think this one's a little tougher, okay? How can a nonprofit address COVID-19s in their application? More particularly, how can they make their application compelling and stand out?
Great question. The first thing I'm going to tell you is connect with your current funders. They have already invested in you. Your mission already aligns with their areas of interest. Connect with them. And I don't mean this is the standard email that just went out like, hey, this is how we're handling COVID. This is a personal conversation that you need to have with them over the phone or by Zoom that clearly conveys the situation your organization is in, any difficulties you're having, and the needs that you have immediately. Let's say it's computers, so you can get more people online to either go to work or to put some information in. And you want to be direct in conveying the critical importance of your organization, even if you're not on the front lines. You want to talk about how you're pivoting your programming in order to meet the needs of what's happening right now. So an example of that would be, let's say part of your programming is that you do healthy cooking and living and wellness types of things. And maybe you can't have those classes right now for the obvious reason we can't get together. But maybe one thing that you're doing is that you're offering healthy recipes online, or you're providing, you know, Zoom workout or Zoom cooking classes. You want to be able to demonstrate how you've been able to pivot and how you're meeting the needs right now. Are you keeping people sane? Are you keeping people, you know, happy? Are you bringing people connected and together? And so the other thing that you want to ask them for is flexibility in your current funding. So a lot of them are open to that. I'm seeing that there is a lot of flexibility. They're letting you use it for general organization. And the last thing that you want to ask them is about the opportunity for emergency funding as well. So the first thing, connect with your current funders.
Arlene, I think this might be the $64 question. For those who remember, there was a show like that. How can a nonprofit find out what type of funding is available to them?
Well, I mean, before we get to that, let me just kind of go back just a little bit in terms of your, you know, what the actual ask looks like. You definitely want to stay in line with what your mission is. Do not change your programming chasing dollars. That doesn't look good to a funder. There's very few cases in which you need to pivot over from what you normally do because you're the only organization to meet those immediate needs. But really, you want to craft everything around your mission. It's really important that your funder understands why you matter now and how your programming is relevant. I have to stress this, you cannot tell the same story that you were telling back in January and February. That no longer exists. So again, you cannot tell the same story. You have to go back, look at your strategy as an organization, look at your programming, go back and really consider how you are adding to frontline needs and the crisis, why that matters, and how you are making lives better now. All within the outline of your mission. And then you also want to talk about how you are allowing flexibility for your organization in the future because you've come up with new ways to meet the needs of those that you serve. And your strategy shouldn't just be for now. It needs to go, at least till the end of 2020, if not further. And the story that you want to convey around that is not one of doom and gloom or, desperation. You want to talk about your organization in terms of its agility, its resiliency, your ability to pivot, the new things that you are doing, and how that's preparing you going forward. Again, go back and revisit your budgets. You cannot turn in the same budgets that you had for January and February, that you need to make some modifications according to where things are now. And that's true for your organization and your program budget. And then the last thing.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. The last thing is really collaboration and partnership. That's going to be really critical for a lot of these grants going forward. You want to look for opportunities to combine resources with other entities who serve the same individuals as you. Funders want greater impact, and they want to know that we're all, in this together and that there's not this competition for funds. So you want to look at ways in which you can share resources and look for additional funding opportunities. I think that's really going to be key for you.
And I'm glad, again, I think collaboration and partnerships have always been important, but especially so because
yes, sir.
we talk about, put yourself in the shoes of a funder. They're not choosing between the good and the bad. They're choosing between the good and the good, particularly now. Collaboration and partnerships will be huge.
Huge.
Arlene, probably in my 100 workshops, the question I hear just about the most, and I'm going to fire it off to you. How should a nonprofit assess how much to ask for?
Okay. Well, that's going to depend on a couple of things, but I think one of the things that you had asked me before this was, how do I go after funding? So let me just go after that question. Let me answer that question first. Yeah. So in terms of relief funding, obviously we talked about reallocating your current funds. We talked about going after regular funding, and then there's a whole host of different types of COVID funding that's coming out. Don't worry, you don't need to write all of this down. In the email that Jim provides after this webinar, there will be a link to a document that has all of this on there. And we've also done a hyperlink for each one of them, so you don't even have to go and do the search. We've done it all for you. But these are just a bunch of different entities that are consolidating different funding opportunities. Some of them are by region, some of them are national, some of them are international. So these are some of the ones that you want to go after. But I do have to say that these two are really, really critical right now as well, because these organizations who are offering these grant opportunities cannot get this information out fast enough through their standard web pages or through the consolidation from all these other groups. So they're putting out, press releases, which you're going to find off of a Google search right away. You want to connect with them on social media as well. Especially those organizations that support grants, because that's the first place that they're going to be able to put some information out very, very quickly. And you want to be able to jump on that as soon as you can. So again, we're going to send you this link to this document that has all the hyperlinks for all these things that I just mentioned. And then another thing that you can do is follow Ascend NBS on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. We post opportunities for grants with links directly into wherever the grant application is or wherever the guidelines are as well.
Arlene, thank you for doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Let's jump back, if we could. This is kind of a, how should a nonprofit assess how much to ask for?
So that's going to depend on a couple of things. So you want to definitely go back and revise your budget like we talked about, right? And then another thing you want to do is you want to talk to the funder. You want to communicate your needs. You want to listen to what they have to say in terms of what they're willing to fund. They may not fund the full thing, but they may fund a portion of it. Another thing is, some of them, well, most of them actually for foundation grants are putting out specific dollar amounts. So they're only going to fund 5,000. They're only going to fund 10,000. And so that really restricts your ask right there. And then just the general rule is a 15 to 20% if they happen not to put anything on there. So 15 to 20% of your program budget or the organization budget according to their guidelines. So you want to read those guidelines very closely.
Very good. This is, and by the way, we're doing great on time. Thank you, Arlene. So I think we're going to have some time to get to audience questions. But of course, anybody knows me, I'm not finished yet. A couple more. How should a nonprofit go about choosing a grant writing consultant that's a good fit for them?
Okay. So one of the first things you want to do is to develop a statement of work. And that statement of work really needs to include, what your expectations are, what your goals are, your budget. You want to think about it in terms of how many grants you need, the way in which you want to utilize them. Do you just want to use them sporadically for a grant or two here or there? Do you want them to be your grant writing department, obviously with your oversight? Are they working toward a particular goal, or is your expectation that they would work a certain number of hours? So first thing is really developing that statement of work so you know what you're looking for. The second thing is to talk to your peers. Ask other CEOs and executive directors if they've utilized any grant consultants and if they would recommend them. If you don't have that opportunity, you can also look at networks that support nonprofits. And so we have the Nonprofit Council here and the Area Foundation, and those would be good ones just to call up and say, hey, I'm looking for a grant writing consultant. Do you have a list? You want to come up with some interview questions that really will address your needs. And so you want to make sure that their technical expertise matches with what you need. You want to consider how they communicate. How busy is the consultant? Do they understand how nonprofits work and your role? Do they have a clear sense of what their responsibility would be? What is their fee structure, and how do they operate in terms of the scope of grant writing? So do they do research all the way through submission, or is there just one particular thing that they prefer to do? And then once you do that, you want to meet with 2 or 3 of them to get a sense of their personality and how you're going to work with them, and also ask them all the same interview questions so that you have the ability to really do a good comparison. You want to then request a work plan or proposal, which includes a writing sample. I have to stress that a lot because I do hear from people who said everything else looked good, but I don't like their writing. This is a good opportunity for you to take a look at that. You could read what they put down in terms of the need statements, the project section, things like that. So you definitely want to include that writing sample as a requirement. And then you want to look at their social media and website. Does it align with you and your organization? You're going to be the one working with them. And the last thing you want is a headache. So you want to make sure that this person aligns with who you are and what your organization stands for. And the last thing, ask for references and call them. A lot of times we ask for them, but we don't do that last part where you call. So I think, you know, if you sort of follow these, I think you'll get a good feel for who works best for, with, you know, who will work best for you and who doesn't.
And my final question kind of piggybacks on this one. Okay, say we're a small nonprofit that has limited staff and resources, and they don't have a grant writer, okay? How do you suggest they approach the task of preparing a COVID-19 related grant request without hiring a consultant?
So there's a couple of things that I would say that you need to do, and it's really your time management and project management in that whole capacity of you being one of or the only person for your organization. That's really what it all comes down to, right? But in specifically in terms of you know, a grant writing, you want to develop a strategy going forward for your fundraising overall and the grant component of it within there, because we all know that grant writing takes a lot of time. Your whole fundraising strategy has changed. You don't have the events going on anymore. So you really want to take some time to do that. You know, give yourself, you know, 3 to 7 days to really work on that, because that's really going to dictate everything for you going forward. You want to be specific in terms of the things that you need, your budgets and all those other things. And then you want to prioritize that strategy in a way that is manageable for you. So if you are a small organization and there's 5 of you, maybe you can tackle your top you know, 100 donors, right? And funders. You know, and this is a list that encompasses both, because you're still doing all of the cultivation on the individual giving side while having to do grant writing. So, you know, and maybe if it's just you or one other person, then you're only doing 10, right? And then, you know, do I write 1 grant a week versus 1 grant a month? You know, that strategy will help you determine that going forward. Another thing that you can do is solicit your board for help to write grants, to review them, to help you with strategy, to help you with budgets, or to help you in making calls to those funders as well. There's also opportunities right now for a lot of volunteers. If you had a volunteer poll before, maybe they would be interested in helping you in this capacity. And the other thing is there are a lot of professionals who aren't working right now, and it is driving them crazy. So there might be opportunities for some individuals that you know that have been laid off or furloughed, and maybe they're kind of considering getting into this area, and you know, they might be able to help you. So I think those are the ways that you might be able to tackle it as a strategy when you're working by yourself.
Well, thank you, Arlene. By the way, we're doing great on time. We're right on schedule. And before, John, I'm going to ask you to queue up. Remember, the folks that were first in the waiting room, we wanted to give first dibs at asking a question. But before we do that, I want to see if our attendees have a good memory. We're nonprofit strong. Can you do me a favor and type that in the chat space? We're nonprofit strong. We're nonprofit strong. And we're going to get through this. We're nonprofit strong. John, before we go to, I'm seeing some I like it, by the way. And everyone, again, you're going to receive a newsletter tomorrow that's going to give you a JPEG. And we would encourage you to incorporate using our slogan and graphic in your e-communications as you see fit. John, do we have some questions?
Yes, one of the questions was from John. Let's see.
Not you, right?
Not me. No, I'm sorry. It was from Jim. And he was asking.
And not me either.
Not you either. No. But he was asking, is there legitimate concern that corporation contributions will go down in 2020?
That's a tough one, so I'm going to assign it to Arlene.
Okay. Well, I'd say overall, if you're looking at 2020, we've already seen an increase, a huge increase. What does that look like a couple of months from now, you know, in the November, December timeframe? I think that will depend on how quickly we can how quickly the economy can bounce back, but it's also the average of everything. So you do see, while, you know, maybe there may be some organizations who aren't going to be able to give as much because they're not, there's not enough revenue being generated at this time. You do see others like HEB, who is really, really making a lot of money and is going to put some of that money back. So I think the overall average for 2020 will be an increase. I think if we're going to
Let's
see
do a
any
fist bump
decrease,
on
it will
that. I
be
love hearing that.
2021.
Do you see my fist? Fist bump. Okay. John, who was one of the other early questions?
Another question is, what is a cage code and where do I find one?
So on
That's
grants.
Arlene.
Yeah, so on grants.gov, I believe it's over on the left-hand side, you will see, do you meet the requirements, or, you know, it'll have something to that effect. And when you click on that, it'll ask you specifically for those things that are necessary, one of which will be a link to a cage code. And that's a whole different government entity that provides that. With that cage code, you will also need a DUNS number. And the DUNS number comes from Duns and Bradstreet, which is a whole other entity. So you've got to go through this process of connecting it just to be able to register with grants.gov and be able to submit something.
Arlene, I think you've done that a gazillion times.
A gazillion times. I wish they'd make the process so much easier.
Yeah. Yeah. John, do we have some other early questions? We still have a little time left.
That's it for now, Jim.
Okay.
So Jim, one of the questions that you and I talked about when we were preparing for this was, you know, how do we determine the financial impact, or how does a nonprofit determine the financial impact of COVID?
We have a couple of minutes if you could assign.
So, you know, one of the things that you can do is to compare the time frame from your for your last 2 years, obviously taking into account if you've had anything major that has occurred, either new programming, you know, reduction in staff, capital campaign, those types of things. But you want to look at your time frame maybe from March through December that you had last year, and the year before that, and kind of take a look at where things are going right now. The other thing is on the document that's going to be available that Jim will send out to you after the webinar. I've also included a link to 2 different entities that have just come up during COVID. One is called FAIR, and that they normally deal with small business. And so I sort of think of nonprofits from the administrative side as a small business. And so FAIR has a calculator that you can utilize, and it asks you a series of questions on where things have been for your organization over the last 6 months. And it'll help you determine what the effects of COVID are, taking into a lot of calculations and math and all types of things that go into that. Loom is another one. It's also on the document that Jim and I will provide to you after. And Loom also does a calculation, but it does kind of like a forecast for you and lets you know, how long it will kind of take you to recover and things like that. So those are 2 that you can use. And if not, just use your data. Go back to what you know you've been able to do for the last 2 years. And that should give you some idea of how things are going to decrease, slightly for you with the remaining part of 2020.
Fantastic. Thank you, Arlene. And John and Andrea have been kind of coach me to this part. John, I hit the green share screen. Is that right?
That's correct. And while you're doing that, I did want to mention there are a couple of questions that came in. One was, can a consultant be, I just lost it. Let me pull that back up.
I saw that. That was my good friend, Jim Barshop, I believe.
Can a consultant be hired to create a focused grant calendar?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, just communicating that to the consultant. Some don't want to do that. Some don't know how. Some grant writers are just strictly for, filling in, just doing the grant. But that is something that we do for some of our clients. So just depends on the client needs. But yes, overall consultants can.
Great.
And the other follow-up.
Okay, John, you had something else?
Yes, there was a follow-up to a comment made earlier about the cage. Question is, isn't cage assigned after you enter your DUNS in SAM.gov?
You are going to provide the cage website with your DUNS number. It's part of the application process.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay. Arlene, it's amazing how much information and knowledge and expertise you could share in 30 minutes. This has really
Well,
been terrific.
thank you so much. I appreciate the
And we're not
opportunity to
finished with you
talk.
yet. Okay.
Yeah,
We're
but
not.
I just appreciate the opportunity to talk about something I love. I know people don't know that there are people like me who are weird and love grants, but I do
And we
love
love
it.
you.
I
I
love
gotta
it.
tell you, we love you. Yes. Okay. I'm going to take a few minutes to wrap up here. The late poet Maya Angelou once said, "People will not remember what you said. They won't remember what you did. They will never forget how you made them feel." I like to say that is the crowning piece of advice we give the fundraisers. Make your donor prospects feel like they are the most important people in the world to you. Fundraising is either that easy or that hard. Want to make sure that you all have signed up for our free monthly newsletter, which will also get you invited to these future webinars. So I want to make sure some of you have been forwarded an invitation by a colleague or a friend, and that's great. But you're not going to receive future invitations unless you have signed up. And this will be, by the way, let's tell you what's going to happen from here. We are going to post, Andrea and I can't have dinner or even our glass of wine until we post a summary and the resource page with links that Arlene talked about, both on LinkedIn and on Facebook. And then, thanks to John, sometime between midnight and 6 a.m., and we're going to send you a recording and all the slides. And by the way, that's not just going to you all, but even if some people signed up and registered but were unable to join us, they're going to be sent that too, okay? And I want to quiz you again, if you could type in, I forget now, we're a nonprofit. Arlene, what are we? We're
Nonprofit
nonprofit
strong.
strong. Please type that in. Please type that in. Also want to mention that I am a first-time author, and it's called the 10 Simple Fundraising Lessons. And you'll have, it's only 80 pages. It's a quick read. You also, in the slides, get a link to how you can order one or multiple copies for your board and staff. I like to end with a money-back guarantee. Money back, Arlene. Money back.
Money back.
Your chances of getting the gift go way up when you ask. Arlene, what do you think? Is that money back guarantee?
Absolutely.
Work
Absolutely.
with government and foundation relief grants?
Yeah, you get absolutely nothing if you don't ask.
Right. And this is, I grew up in the 60s, and I was a big fan of President John F. Kennedy. And he said something on June 10th, 1963, giving the commencement speech at American University. And every time I look at it, I get goosebumps because I think he's speaking to us now, right now in 2020. And President Kennedy said, and I just love this, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal. I just think that President Kennedy was thinking of us right now. That is such an apropos quote. I want to thank everyone for joining us. First of all, to our producer, John Largent, who makes the impossible possible. Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, John.
John, I probably won't bother you for another, I don't
5
know,
minutes.
45 minutes. I got to have a glass of wine. And to Arlene Siller, you were just a treasure chest of knowledge and practical and useful information that's going to position our friends to equate more money into more mission. So thank you so much for partnering with us.
Thank you.
And folks, we're actually ahead of schedule. So Arlene Andrea's got a bottle of wine open. It looks like you got Fiesta menu planned. John, I don't know what you have planned, but again, to all our learning community partners, first of all, thank you for forming this learning community. But more importantly, thank you for the way each and every day you serve our community and you make life better for others. And you've been there. And we believe, because every day you see close up that your donors and friends demonstrate what Abraham Lincoln called the better part of the better angels of our nature. You see that in people, and we're going to see it more than anything else. And also, I wanted to remind you that everybody who registered is going to be sent a recording with the slides that Arlene and I showed, and also the recording. So that will go out. John and I pledge it will go out before Thursday noon. But I want to thank you again, everybody in the nonprofit sector, and that's the CEOs, the Director of Development, the staff members, the board members, the volunteers, the donors. You know, we're nonprofit strong, and we're in this together, and we're going to win together. So we look forward to seeing you next Wednesday with Marv Leroy, who is the president and founder of the Institute for Philanthropic Excellence. And he's going to join me in a discussion of the discovery, the cultivation, the solicitation, and the stewardship of donors during COVID-19. Thank you for joining us. Have a good evening. And we're nonprofit strong. Can you do it one more time and type it on the screen? We're nonprofit strong.
Nonprofit strong.
Have a great evening.
Bye, everyone.